Hello and welcome to another weekly update. It's funny, there's really only one thing I want to talk about this week, but it's come at quite a good time because it's given me the opportunity to expand out on it and really discuss it in depth and give you some of my thoughts about it. And I did a blog post about this yesterday, but I think it's worth going over and going into some detail. That piece of news concerns Microsoft Lync 2013 software development kit and moving from mainstream support to extended support, which is happening on April the 20th this year. Now, before you kind of stop watching and think, well, actually, what's this got to do with me? We've moved on from Lync 2013, really, haven't we? The 2013 version of the SDK for the client SDK was actually the last version of the SDK to get released, and it's worked fine with Skype for Business and the on-premise releases. So it's kind of interesting to see that this is now going into extended support. So as a developer, if you've got applications written using the client SDK, and if so, what does that mean? So if you have any applications that interact with the client, so you're doing things like listening for the client incoming calls, so you're doing toast pop-ups, or you might be controlling the client in some way, accepting calls or rejecting calls, or anything like that, you're probably using the client SDK. Okay, so the first thing for developers is, well, what does extended support mean? What does it mean when Microsoft say it's coming out of mainstream support? Well, the first thing is that the SDK won't just stop working, it will continue to work. And what extended support means is that Microsoft will continue to give you security updates for the product. So any kind of security flaws and security problems that come up, Microsoft will fix them. They'll do that at no cost, but they won't be fixing anything that isn't a security flaw, and they won't be adding any new features. And extended support lasts for at least 5 years. So there's a 5-year window now where we know that the SDK will continue to receive security updates, so it will be, in quotes, safe to use. But we know it won't get any new features, and we know that if there's any kind of bugs that are not security related, they probably won't get fixed. So that's the kind of judgment call developers got to make about whether or not to continue using it, and that's that's an individual decision that needs to be made. Now, what's interesting is that we know Microsoft are coming out with Skype for Business 2019 for on-premise. And we know that's coming. I don't think we particularly know the timelines, other than inferring what we want to out of the name. We're not sure whether or not it's going to include, an updated version of the SDK, which will kind of kick that support back into mainstream support, if you like. You can imagine if they shipped a newer version of the client of the SDK with 2019, the support timescale kind of gets reset. I don't know, but personally, I'm guessing they might not do that. They didn't feel the need to do it with Skype for Business 2015 or 2016. I don't know why they would suddenly feel the need to do it with 2019, other than to reset the support timeline. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to see whether the existing client SDK works with 2019 as well. Now, there's kind of two ways to look at this, and that's what I want to dig into a little bit, because you could look at this and say, well, why aren't Microsoft making a new SDK? Why aren't they supporting this, for Skype for Business developers that want to, keep going and carry on? But actually, it's interesting to look back and say you've got to look at the body of work that went into the developing developer tools for Skype for Business and for Lync. There was such a rich amount of tooling that happened. Probably peaking at around the Lync 2010 timescale, I think, and those tools have continued to be, they haven't really found wanting in ever since then. And to be fair, like Microsoft haven't added loads of new tooling since then. They've broadened out and they've addressed new markets. They've added things like UCWA and the Skype Webb SDK as the world has changed and the world has moved to be much more web-based and much more online. And connections are much less kind of fixed and local. But those kind of original workhorses, the client SDK, UCMA, MSPL, they've continued to kind of just work the way they always have. So that's kind of, in a way, it's testament to how good they were at the time. And that's interesting. It's interesting to look back at that and see how complete that developer toolset was, and the reason for that, and why Microsoft felt it necessary to ship Lync and then Skype for Business with such a rich set of developer tools. And at this point, there's a good story I was told about Microsoft in around the kind of the 2001 era. So, getting on for 17 years ago, something like that. So that's the kind of era of Windows XP, and we weren't where we are now with voice over IP. That wasn't necessarily an assumption. In fact, things like TAPI were around, things like computer telephone integration were around, but they were in their infancy, and we were all just trying to understand how that was gonna, I don't think any of us could see how it was going to change the world. Interestingly, about that time at Microsoft in Redmond, there was a team specifically assigned to look at this telephone computer problem. And this telephone computer problem was, you'd have a computer on the desk, you'd have a telephone on the desk, and you'd be working at your computer, and the telephone would ring, and you would swivel from your computer away to the telephone to take the phone call. You'd moving away from the computer to take the phone call. And then when you're done with the phone call, you swivel back to the computer. Two different worlds, two separate siloed infrastructures, two very different worlds. And the challenge really was how to bring those two together. And so, like I say, there was a team at Microsoft looking at this. They had these kind of regular, semi-regular updates with Bill Gates. And according to the person who told me the story, Bill didn't really like the proposals Microsoft were kind of throwing around internally, because they were all based on copying existing PBX solutions at the time. And he kept asking, what is our strategy? And nobody was giving him the right answer, or the answer he wanted, and he was getting more and more worked up, asking, what is our strategy? What is our strategy? And eventually he answered his own question. Our strategy is software. Our strategy is software. That approach is really what led them to build, what became LCS, OCS, Lync. Software first approach built on standard Windows OS boxes, using software to differentiate, and including in those software layers developer abstractions. The key there is that by itself, bringing voice over IP isn't enough. If you want to make real-time communications a feature that can be consumed anywhere, you need the developer tools to put that in. And Microsoft got that, and they understood that, and that's why Lync and all those previous and future iterations of that line contained all those developer tools. And you can see how complete they were, because we're still in use today, and they've been remarkably versatile in that 7-8 year period since then. Remarkably versatile, but there is one line they really can't cross. There is a dead end point for them, and that's that jump to Teams, because Teams is just so different. It's such a different model. It's such a different. It's just a completely different architecture. It's a different way of thinking about how we communicate, and those tools just don't really make sense there. And yeah, you could throw your arms up in the air and say, oh, what are we going to do? This is terrible. But actually, we should look at the developer tools that Microsoft have made available for Teams, because there are many and varied. And if you are bemoaning the kind of lack of the support matrix and the way that the client SDK is kind of looks like it's being, it's going into extended support, and it probably will do its 5 years and then go. You should be looking at the Teams tools, because Microsoft have put that effort into providing a rich set of developer tools on Teams as well. And it's interesting to see you can do things that you couldn't do in Lync and Skype for Business. The way you can extend the user interface, the way you can embed things like tabs and extensions. We were asking for those things in Lync because people want to be able to do that. But it was really hard to do in a fixed down locked Windows 32-bit application it's much easier to do in the Teams world because they put these extensibility points in and let developers fill them. Bot Framework is providing an excellent way of allowing users to talk to computers and doing many of the things that we were using UCMA to do. So it's really interesting to look at some of that. I think there's definitely things that Teams could have that it doesn't have today for developers. And if we look specifically at the client SDK, because that's kind of what we started off talking about, although you can do those extensions, I think it'd be great to see an API that provides some of the some notification of some of the things that happen in the client. So, conversation starting, stopping, presence changing, signing in, signing out, even to allow applications to respond to those things. But overall, though, there's one big takeaway that's resonated for me, and that is that these developer tools for Teams came in with V1 of Teams. Not as an add-on, not as an afterthought. The most of them came in out of the box with the V1 of Teams, and that tells me that strategy as software mentality is still going strong, within the Microsoft product teams, and that they get this, they understand, they appreciate that need for extensibility for developers. And so I'm still super excited to see, kind of where this goes. I'm excited to see what new developer tools they're going to bring along for the journey. I think it's the developer experience is on parity with, that kind of peak that we had in, say, Lync 2010. Don't know, probably not, I guess, overall. But you've got to remember Teams is just a few years old. So if they keep iterating and adding developer experiences at the rate they've been doing so far, it won't be very long at all before we're at parity there. And I think there's plenty that developers can do today, and developers are doing today on Teams. You may disagree, you may not, you may agree or disagree, but you can't argue that developers are making apps for Teams every day now and bots for Teams every day. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to see how we can continue to do things like improve business processes and enable some of these scenarios on Teams. I think, in a way, it'll be sad to see the client SDK kind of go away, and I think it will sort of grow away gradually because I think people will probably keep using it under extended support. Although, every organisation, every company are going to have to make a judgment call on what that means for them and whether or not it's the right decision to do. But I think we'll sort of see it slowly go away over time. But so that's I'll be sad to see that go, but at the same time, it does feel like we are just starting out on a brand new journey with new and exciting ways of working, and I am very excited for that. So those are my long and extended and slightly rambling thoughts on that announcement around the client SDK going into extended support. And I've been talking for nearly 15 minutes now, so I should probably stop and let you get on with your day. Have a great week, and I will talk to you again next week.